is almost ready. Just give me another minute. I'll give a few minutes for people to log in. And I will share my screen in the meantime. Hold on. Why is it not giving me the regular options? That's very strange. Normally when I hit share screen, it gives me the option of different windows that I have open. And at the moment, it's not. So please stand by while I try and figure out what's going on here. We'll figure out what the issue is. Everything else is perfectly normal. Why are you being weird? Trying to avoid sharing myself into an infinite loop. Let me move that over there for the moment at least. And close that, close that. Maybe I can at least get it to look right and I'll figure out what the problem is next time. All right, make sure that connects over there. Waiting for the YouTube channel to show me that I've got it going right. And it's just showing, there it is. Okay, for a second there, it was just a blank screen. All right, so it looks like it's working. Like I said, I'm not quite sure why it was behaving badly, but technology is technology. So, good evening to everyone. Let's get down to work and study ourselves a little Yevamot. So we are going to start with a few more questions carrying on from last week about the order of events regarding if a person doesn't follow the procedure properly and instead gets the status of the people involved tangled, how do we untangle, or do we need to untangle under different circumstances? So we're going to go ahead and start. Don't worry, chapter 5 is not too long, and I think you'll find chapter 6 perhaps a little bit more approachable on certain aspects. At least it'll be a conversation that doesn't have as many technical points to contend with. Chapter 5, Mishnah 3. Let me roll this up to the middle of my screen to make it easier to read. If the Yavam, remember that is the man who is going to, who is under a connection to the widow, gave the Yevamot, the widow, a bill of divorce, and afterwards performed levirate betrothal with her, meaning the ma'amar, the verbal betrothal, she requires another bill of divorce to cancel the levirate betrothal, as well as chalitza to nullify the levirate bond. Let's untangle that. So remember, all of these are something went wrong at the beginning that didn't follow the normal procedure. Normal procedure should be path A, he agrees to marry her, he betroths her with a levirate betrothal, and then they sleep together and it is finalized. Path B, he decides he's not going to marry her and nor is anyone else, therefore they do the process of chalitza, where they separate formally. Here we have a confusion because he starts off by giving her a get, a bill of divorce. Like we talked about before, since he is partly connected to her automatically when his brother dies, this has at least some logic behind it of why he might think to do it, but he has not fulfilled the biblical requirement. And so we might think that he's done or he might be not. But then to make life more complicated, he performs the levirate betrothal. He makes a statement. He doesn't actually sleep with her yet, but he makes the statement of betrothal to her, even though he already gave her a get in the beginning. So she then will need a bill of divorce to cancel that secondary levirate betrothal. And he has to do a chalitza because the original bill of divorce and the second bill of divorce, either one of those gets, does not fulfill the requirement of canceling the levirate bond that was established when his brother died. Does that make sense? Okay. If he gave her a bill of divorce, a get, and then engaged in intercourse with her, she requires a bill of divorce to cancel the betrothal that took place via intercourse, and chalitza to nullify the levirate bond. The intercourse did not affect the levirate bond because once he gave her a bill of divorce, she was forbidden to him. So the commentary sort of tells it all, that when he gave that first get, as inadequate as it was to fully sever the relationship between himself and her, it was enough to then forbid her to him. Therefore, the sex they had after that first divorce was not enough to fulfill the levirate bond that had been established when his brother died. However, thus he has to give her a new divorce to counteract the intercourse that they had, and do chalitza to sever the original levirate bond that was never properly taken care of. Okay. Let me scroll down again, keeping it centered. If he gave her a bill of divorce and performed chalitza, nothing is effective after chalitza, as the levirate bond was completely nullified. So the general principle is, he gave her a bill of divorce, which was unnecessary, but he then performed chalitza, did the ceremony that the Torah describes and which we've talked about before. When that has been done, anything he does afterwards has no legal significance with regards to the levirate bond. The levirate connection is now gone. So that is he has finished that relationship. Similarly, if he performed chalitza with her and then either performed levirate betrothal or gave a bill of divorce or engaged in intercourse with her, right, then he's done nothing. Once chalitza happens, everything that comes afterwards doesn't count legally towards the levirate marriage. Alternatively, if he engaged in intercourse with her and then either performed levirate betrothal or gave a bill of divorce or performed chalitza after they engaged in relations, nothing is effective after chalitza or intercourse, meaning any action performed afterwards is unrelated to the levirate bond. So once you have triggered one of the biblical level of connections in the correct order, then anything afterwards cannot affect the biblical level connection of the levirate bond. Hopefully that makes sense, even if all of the word order can sound a little crazy. And then we're going to get an introduction sentence, which will lead us into Mishnah 4. So I just want to check and see if we have any questions about that before we jump into Mishnah 4.
Yes, Rabbi.
Yes, sir.
So basically, either if you have, if you complete the Yevamot, if you have intercourse or you have chalitza, that's pretty much ends the whole process, right?
If you haven't done anything before it to mess it up, yes.
All right.
Right, if you do something earlier that actually messes it up, then it, as we just saw, can take a lot of work to untangle it.
Right, but once you do chalitza, it's all over, right? You can't mess up chalitza.
Once you do chalitza, it's all over unless you did something that also needs a get.
All right.
So if you did, for example, the betrothal and did chalitza, you still have to do a get because of the betrothal.
All right. That makes sense.
All right. So let's get that last sentence there and then jump into Mishnah 4. The above principles apply both in cases of one Yevamah to one Yavam, one man, one woman, one wife, one brother, as well as in the cases of 2 Yevamot to 1 Yavam, 2 wives, 1 brother. So that last case is what we're going to see in Mishnah 4. How so? Right? How does this work when you've got 2 wives and 1 brother and this whole ordering of activities? If he performed levirate betrothal, with his Yevamot, and levirate betrothal with that one, meaning the rival wife, so he has said, I'm going to marry you, I'm going to marry you, to both of the widows. They require 2 bills of divorce, each for her own levirate betrothal, and chalitza with one of them to release them both from the levirate bond. So because he has made a proclamation of marriage to both of them, they both need to have that proclamation dissolved with a proper get. However, a get does not dissolve the levirate bond. For that, he still has to do chalitza. And as we have seen repeatedly, doing chalitza with one of them also releases any of the rivals, any of the other wives of the deceased. Just center again. Not sure if I have it zoomed in more, if they're just longer, but it seems like I'm scrolling more in the middle of talking. If he performed levirate betrothal with this one and gave a bill of divorce to that one, the first woman, meaning the one that he did the levirate betrothal for, requires a bill of divorce to cancel the levirate betrothal, and one of them must receive chalitza. All right, so what's the issue going on in this particular case? So he has made a declaration to one of them, but then he gave a get to the other one. Having given a get to the second one, he is now forbidden to her relatives. He's not allowed to marry the relatives of a woman he divorced. That means he cannot finalize the original marriage he was planning on doing with the first widow, because she is a relative, in a way, of the second. So he has to go ahead and dissolve, right? That in this particular case, because of having given the divorce to the second one, he has nullified the possibility of the relationship with the first one. Does that make sense? And then he has to do chalitza because he hasn't done chalitza yet. All right. If he performed levirate betrothal with this one and engaged in intercourse with that one, they require 2 bills of divorce. He must perform chalitza with one of them. Right? So he performs the ma'amar, the statement, with one, but he has intercourse with the other. Having intercourse without the proper betrothal is improper according to the rabbinic system, and therefore it is not considered to be a valid form of marriage. Therefore, he has to divorce her, and he then also has to divorce the one that he had levirate betrothal with, because she is no longer allowed to him either. However, he still hasn't satisfied the levirate bond, and so chalitza is necessary.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Intercourse isn't valid?
So the rabbis set up that intercourse isn't valid unless it is done appropriately as a fulfillment of the levirate bond.
I thought the problem here was that he gave a divorce to one, therefore he would be prohibited to the sister. But flat out, I thought you could do intercourse after.
Just a moment while I double check my notes, because there are a lot of different cases back and forth here, and so I may have put the wrong one in the wrong order. Hold on a second. The one, intercourse of the second. Just a second. Levirate betrothal of one. No, that's not what. If you gave, see, this is the problem when they all look alike, which is even more telling in the Hebrew. There we go. Gave the divorce, and then
it's the get that prohibits him, not the fact that.
Hold on. I'm sorry. Just let me find my notes here. He gave the divorce to the one, and then the intercourse with the other one. Right, because it's Right, because once he had given the divorce to the first one, then the intercourse with the second one was not allowed.
All right.
Right, because it's the order of activity here. If he had the intercourse with the other one first, he would have had, it would have been possible.
All right.
And that's, yeah, in the Hebrew, it's no offense to the editor of the Mishnah, but if we just scroll back here, you can see that it is really fun the way it is, set up with these parallels of this one to this one, that one to that one, this one to this one, that one to that one. This one is needed. This one to this one, that one to that one, this one is needed. It's very parallel structure for each of the verses. And I apologize if my memory of which pair of the different activities, A plus B or B plus C, got a little confused there.
All right. Thanks, Rabbi. The Hebrew doesn't have the notes, right?
No. So this translation, like many modern translations, everything you see in bold exists in the Hebrew. Everything that's not in bold is the assistant translation. However, even where we have the bold for the Hebrew, often where it's two words, for example, levirate betrothal, it'll have the word ma'amar just by itself, rather than double words. And the same thing, a bill of divorce is just the word get. So all of the different, what's the term? The different permutations, all the different permutations sound very, very similar to each other in the Hebrew.
Yeah, Rabbi, when I was reading the rabbinic, the UCSJ notes, it was using the word mayamar and get to. I didn't really see those.
Which I prefer. This translation is not the USCJ translation. I can't quite remember where this translation came from. Hold on a second. I can tell you in a second. The William Davidson edition, which is in the Koran Talmud. So that's where this particular translation came from. And just pulled me back to chapter 5. So it's not the USCJ translation, which is also a very good translation. I like this one, however, because it highlights the Hebrew and the English. The Hebrew and the bold with the English connections, so that you can at least get a feel for the style of the original Hebrew. When I look, I don't know how well this will show up on the camera. How is that clear? On my notepad, when I have the original Hebrew, you can see how it's set up as very parallel columns and styles, and it's a lot clearer how the structure of this Mishnah is very repetitive, in a way that I think is supposed to be helpful because you're going through all the permutations. But occasionally, depending upon where my brain is, can still be a little bit mentally tongue-tied. All right, so let me see if I can find in our pairs of permutations where we just finished. We just had the levirate, betrothal with Chalitza, the regards to bill of divorce, Chalitza with the first. Hold on, levirate, bill of divorce, there we are. All right, so he performed levirate betrothal and then engaged in intercourse. With that one, they require 2 bills of divorce, and he must perform Chalitza with one of them. Okay, picking up from the middle of Mishnah 4. If the Yavam performed levirate betrothal with this one and performed Chalitza with that one, the first woman requires a bill of divorce. So by doing Chalitza with the second wife, it automatically frees all of the other wives who are not yet married, and the betrothal, the engagement, is not sufficient to hold on to, and now he is of course not allowed to be with her, thus he has to give her a divorce to cancel out the betrothal. If the Yavam gave a bill of divorce to this Yevamot and a bill of divorce to that one, they require Chalitza from him. Even though he gave a divorce to both of them, it is not sufficient for a levirate marriage, so he has to do Chalitza in its full form. If he gave a bill of divorce to this one and engaged in intercourse with that one, the latter one requires a bill of divorce and chalitza. So again, he's not allowed to be with the second one, therefore it couldn't have been fulfilling the levirate bond, and so he has to give her a bill of divorce, and he has to do a chalitza because that has not been done yet. We're almost at the end. Yes?
Is it chalitza for the latter, or is it chalitza for one of them?
Chalitza for one of them.
One of them.
If he gave a bill of divorce to this one and performed levirate betrothal with that one, so he gives a get to one and does the ma'amar with the other, the latter requires a bill of divorce and he must perform chalitza with one of them. So again, this is a place where we see that even though technically with the bill of divorce to one of them, he hasn't changed the levirate status, he has changed it enough according to the rabbinic system that he is now not allowed to marry the other wife. And that means that even though he had done a betrothal, he is not allowed to continue with that, to consummate it. And so that last one will need a get and will also have to have chalitza for at least one of them to free any of them. And the final case, if the Yavam gave a bill of divorce to this woman and performed chalitza with that one, nothing is effective after chalitza, and he cannot betroth the rival wife. So once you do chalitza, chalitza is the end, and you are no longer able to be connected to any of the other wives through the levirate bond. Okay. Second, trying to line it up. Try and get it all to a place where I can see over the top of my notepad. Mishnah 5. If he performed chalitza with one Yevamot and then performed chalitza with a second Yevamot, or he performed chalitza with one Yevamot and then proceeded to either perform levirate betrothal, give a bill of divorce, or engage in intercourse with a second Alternatively, he engaged in intercourse with one Yevamot, engaged in intercourse with the second. With one Yevamot, engaged with the second Yevamot, or engaged in intercourse with one Yevamot, and proceeded to perform levirate marriage, betrothal, giving a bill of divorce, or performing chalitza with the second. Nothing is effective after chalitza or intercourse. So this is actually hearkening back to Mishnah 3, where we are reminding ourselves that once chalitza has been done, all the other bonds have been severed, and at least with regards to the levirate connection, nothing else happens once chalitza has taken place, nor if intercourse has done in the proper case. These halachot, these laws, apply both in the case of one Yavam and two Yevamot, as well as two Yevamim and one Yevamah. So the last line is where we get something a little bit more novel, where if there are two brothers and there is one widow, it is possible, perhaps because they are mistaken about what the other person's intentions are, that they could both do chalitza with her, or that one could do chalitza and the other could then go and try and betroth her, or even sleep with her. And the question then becomes, well, what happens if one did one part of one ceremony and the other did the other ceremony? What happens? And the answer is, if chalitza happened first, everything after doesn't count. If the formal proper intercourse happened first, everything after doesn't count, even if it's being done by two different men. Does that make sense? Okay. So, continuing on, if he performed chalitza with one Yevamah, and then proceeded to either perform levirate betrothal, give a bill of divorce, or engage in intercourse with the second Yevamah, right, continuing our theme, alternatively, or he engaged in intercourse with one Yevamah and then proceeded to perform levirate betrothal, or give a bill of divorce, or perform chalitza with the second Yevamah, nothing is effective after chalitza, as we have said. Whether, new information, chalitza took place at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. That wherever chalitza happened, where it happened, everything after it is canceled. All these halachot, however, accord with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who maintains that betrothal does not take effect on a woman who is forbidden due to the prohibition against betrothing a Yevamot after chalitza. But with regards to intercourse, when it is at the beginning, the first act of the Yavam performed with his Yevamot, nothing is effective after it, and any subsequent action is void. However, if it was performed in the middle, and similarly if it was performed at the end, after some action that does impair the validity of that intercourse, then something could be effective after it. Rabbi Nehemiah says, both with regards to intercourse and chalitza, whether performed at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end, nothing is effective after it. If the Yavam performed a valid action according to Torah law, any subsequent action is of no consequence according to the halakha. Okay, so with regards to the options of what would happen, what would a middle or after look like? They talk about the idea that if he had given a bill of divorce and then had the intercourse and then proposed to marry by ma'amar, then that would still require chalitza, because everything is now mistangled, as we have seen in our earlier Mishnahs. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to move into a very different set of topics. Well, obviously it's related because it's in Yevamot, but it's a set of topics regarding what sort of intentionality does a person need to have while having sex, while having bia, as it's referred to in this Mishnah. This may seem like an odd question, but usually when you are performing a mitzvah, you need to know that you are performing a mitzvah. So for example, if you are walking down the street and you hear the sound of the shofar blowing and it happens to be Rosh Hashanah, and you do not notice it or think of it as being the horn of Rosh Hashanah, then you have not performed the mitzvah of hearing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So intentionality does often go hand in hand with the action that performs a mitzvah. And of course, when we're talking about Yevamot, about the Levirate marriage, there is a mitzvah involved, or else we wouldn't be doing any of this. And the mitzvah, as we've talked about in the biblical level, requires intercourse. So therefore, in this case, this particular act of intercourse is a specific mitzvah. The question then becomes, well, what happens if they have intercourse, but it wasn't for this purpose, or they weren't sure what they were doing? Well, we'll see all the different possibilities. One who had intercourse with his Yevamot, whether unwittingly, that is to say, he thought he was having intercourse with someone else, or intentionally, he knew she was his Yevamah and nevertheless had intercourse with her without intent to perform Levirate marriage. Make sure you get that, right? So either in the first case, he was sleeping with a woman, but he thought it wasn't his sister-in-law. He thought it was someone else, maybe one of his other wives, or who knows. For example, the story of Judah and Tamar, he did not know it was his daughter-in-law. Or he knew who he was sleeping with. I know I'm sleeping with my brother's wife. Not good, right? But I'm not doing it to fulfill the mitzvah of Levirate marriage. I'm doing it because it's what I want to do. In those cases, in either case, the rule will apply when we get to the end. Whether due to coercion or willingly, that is to say, whether he is under compulsion to do it, someone is threatening his life, for example, or willingly, he is doing it of his own free will with no external influence at all. Even if he was unwitting and her participation was intentional, meaning he thought she was someone else, but she knew who he was, or his participation was intentional, he knew who she was, but wasn't planning to actually fulfill the mitzvah, and she was unwitting. She didn't realize who he was. Just imagine very dark rooms before people had electric lights. Or he was coerced and she was not coerced. Or she was coerced and he was not coerced. Both one who were merely engaging in the initial stages of intercourse and one who completes the act of intercourse, meaning whether you just began or whether you actually finished in its fullest sense, has thereby acquired his Yevamot. Meaning that for all of these cases, which is a fairly extensive list, if they were together in intimacy, they have become bound together through the Levirate bond. They are married in fulfillment of that mitzvah. And I see the hand, Aaron, but just let me finish the paragraph. And similarly, Torah does not distinguish between an act of intercourse in an atypical manner and intercourse in a typical manner. So we can come back to that last line if people want more explanation. But question first from Aaron.
I was just going to say, intercourse, how come we were talking about intent matters and at the end it says it really doesn't matter?
Well, so I began by talking about how much intent matters in most activities in Jewish life. I began with that preface because I wanted you to see how incredibly different this Mishnah was. Sometimes you won't recognize contrast unless you have seen the other side. So for many mitzvot, intentionality is critical to their performance. The rabbis are making it very clear in this particular case that the intentionality or even the free will of the participants does not matter if it takes place.
And how come this didn't make a difference with Judah and Tamar? How come they still never attributed the wife to the son of Judah?
Well, because they never had a child.
Oh, Judah and Tamar did, right?
Judah and Tamar, but the son never did.
Right, but when
remember the two
sure,
the first two sons died,
right,
and the third son never was with Tamar.
Right, but assuming that you counted Judah's thing with Tamar as a Levirate marriage, how come the sons never counted towards the one of the dead brothers or both the dead brothers?
Who's to say they didn't?
I tried to go back and look at the lineage, and I did not see them attributed to the sons of Judah.
Right. So, it's a good question of if the lineage does not actually mention them as being their sons. We end up with two very important questions. One, how often did Levirate marriage actually take place? And two, was this a pre-Torah unusual set of circumstances? And did it reflect a cultural norm that predates the Torah and which may not have had the same strictness of interpretation? So yes, trying to interpret from Judah and Tamar or from the story of Ruth for that matter, which is also not a perfect Levirate situation, those two cases don't actually fit the proper template of Levirate marriage.
Right. But when reading that chapter in Genesis, it seems like it's very clear that they were trying to have a family member have a son for one of the dead deceased. Seems fairly clear.
Fairly clear, yes. And as a pre-Torah activity, one which is attested to in other ancient sources, that may have just been the way culturally they talked about it, but didn't implement it. It's not possible to deduce anything about what the Torah means by Levirate marriage by the time it's explaining it to us after the giving of the Ten Commandments and the rest of the Torah. You can't use the Judah and Tamar situation to come up with a legal aid for interpretation.
Right, but it does say that God punished the second son for not fulfilling the commandments.
Well, for not being a good brother, yes.
Yeah. Right. Specifically, not having a kid.
Yep.
All right.
So yes, God was absolutely willing to hold people accountable to their behavior before the Torah was given, but that doesn't mean God held people accountable for every detail of the Torah. if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so with that, sorry, let me just, I wanted to finish up one more summary on that notion that we saw in Mishnah 1. We can begin, if we think about it, to uncover why this might have been the case. Because after all, if intentionality was mattered, if even knowledge mattered in this case, then how would any act of intercourse ever be considered a binding act? Now, either party could come back later and say, I didn't mean it. I thought you were someone else. I was forced, or he was forced. She was. There would always be a question hanging over the relationship and thus over any child born. And so in order for it to be resolved in a way that could actually have a firm resolution, there needs to be an actual firm resolution. And that is, if you were intimate together, I don't care the circumstances. You don't have to tell me the details, as the last part makes explicitly clear. Just, were you intimate? Fine. Then Yibum has been completed. You're now married. Mazel tov. And no backing out of it. Once that's done, it's done. All right. But now that we're talking about what's done and done, we need to continue a little bit in that same conversation about other acts of intercourse that can change the relationship or that are forbidden, and what do we mean by it? So Mishnah 2 continues this theme. And so too, with regards to a man who had intercourse with any one of those with whom forbidden relations are forbidden, what are called arayot, the different categories we've talked about, by the Torah, or with those who are unfit for him, even though they are not in the category of arayot. They're not actually in one of the sexual relationships that we're not allowed to be with. For example, a widow with a high priest, a divorcee with a Yevamot who performed chalitza, with a common priest, a mamzeret, which we talked about the category of being a mamzer before, a woman born from an incestuous or adulterous relationship, or a Gibeonite woman with an Israelite, that's the Natin or Natina. Those were the people who were Canaanite that tricked Joshua into making a deal with them, so they were not driven out of the land, but they also were not allowed to be co-equal citizens. The daughter of an Israelite with a mamzer, or a Gibeonite. In all of those cases, the same rules apply that we just described up above. He has disqualified her from marrying into the priesthood through his act, no matter how it was performed. Remember that if there is the woman that has now been, there's an Israelite who has now slept with a woman that she should not, a man with whom she should not be sleeping with. The priesthood had a special rule within their own system, according to the Torah, that once that had happened, she was now off limits. She was hilul, she was desanctified, and therefore not able to be married into the Kohen line. So no matter how it happened, she is now disqualified, and the Torah did not distinguish between the act of intercourse in the atypical manner and the act of intercourse in a typical manner. Questions, comments? Okay. If anybody is confused by that whole typical and atypical, you can always let me know afterwards, since I don't want to go into graphic detail. But for the moment, just allow it to say that yes, typical, atypical, and other forms were allowed, although not usually celebrated, if you'll take my meaning. But that's all we'll need to talk about for the moment. Let's go on to Mishnah 3. A widow to a high priest, a divorcee or a chalutza to a common priest, even if they had only engaged in betrothal and had not yet had intercourse, may not partake of truma, since they are forbidden to the men who betrothed them their betrothal itself disqualifies them from the privileges of priesthood, even if they are the daughters of priests. Okay, so normally, when a woman is getting married to a Kohen, whether it be the Kohen Gadol or whether it be just one of those regular old Kohens, they are allowed to eat from Truma. They're allowed to eat from the special gifts given to the priests and their families. And so too, if a woman is born into a priestly family, she is a Bat Kohen, she is allowed to eat from Truma because of her father's status. However, if she is getting betrothed to a man to whom she is not allowed to get married, and he is not allowed to marry her, for example, a high priest is not allowed to marry a widow, and a regular priest is not allowed to marry a divorcee, then even when they are betrothed, right, they haven't actually finished the marriage ceremony, let alone consummate it, even when they are betrothed, she is no longer able to eat truma, even if she was born into a priestly family, and even more so, she would not be able to eat truma from her fiance's pantry. Now that probably seems a little unfair, because after all, she hasn't actually gotten married, she's only betrothed to him. Why should she be disqualified before anything has happened between them? And indeed, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon declare them fit to partake of Trumah. Since the prohibition is violated through the act of intercourse and not betrothal, these women are disqualified only when they have intercourse. I should point out that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon lose this argument, that the statement of the sages, what we call the first Tana, the first opinion that was anonymous in our text, is the one that actually rules the halacha. That is the one that is the binding law. Excuse me. In a case where these women were widowed or divorced, if it was from marriage, they are disqualified, right, from the priesthood and may not partake of truma. This is because a woman prohibited from marrying a priest who has intercourse with the priest becomes halala and is thereby disqualified from partaking of truma. So if they went through with the marriage, everybody agrees that they're disqualified. However, if they were widowed or divorced from their state of betrothal, meaning they were engaged and their fiance dies, or he divorces her before they are finalized as married husband and wife, they are once again fit to partake of truma, according to all opinions, both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, as well as the anonymous statement of the Chachamim, of the sages. So, although the rabbis in the first half, the general sages, said that from betrothal in a forbidden relationship, she cannot eat truma, they say that if that betrothal ends without having ever been consummated, she can return to the state where she is allowed to eat from the truma. And you might expect that this would be the case where she was already born as a bat kohen to her from her father's house. Questions or comments on that?
But there's not a contradiction here. If the first part say that at the time of the betrothal, it's enough for her to forbid her to eat truma, meaning for them the betrothal is the moment where they build their relationship officially. However, the second part say no, if they not consume, that's okay. You can eat truma with someone else, but so it's in marriage intercourse the more critical. So there's here a contradiction between the first half and the second half of where is the moment, the critical moment.
So the critical moment is both. Right? This is a very typical rabbinic style, which is to put a barrier at point A, but to then remind us that the real barrier is at point B. Now, sometimes if you go past A, there's no way to return. But everybody agrees if you go past B, there's no way to return. So what they're saying here is if you have chosen to get married to a man to whom you are forbidden, then you are not allowed to eat from the truma. You have already sorry, that's not the right phrase. You have already impaired, you've already damaged that connection to the Kohanim by choosing to engage in this engagement. However, if the engagement stops, you're divorced or he dies, then because you never went through with it, we cannot leave that as a permanent status for you, because now there is no nothing blocking you from eating truma. You are not situated in a forbidden relationship. You are not sitting in a rebellious state where you have chosen to enter into this relationship.
So the betrayal is a kind of offense to prevent that person to commit something imprudent, an imprudent act.
Exactly. It's, the idea would be, of course, you shouldn't even get engaged because you can't eat truma at that point, meaning that you have already damaged your relationship, your connection to the right to have the truma, the right to be connected in this particular way of the Kohanim. But if you don't go through with it and you end that moment of foolishness, then yes, you can actually go back because nothing has been physically done to you that permanently changes your status. And Aaron, you had your hand up?
Yes, Rabbi. Is this because the difference between marriage is a biblical mandate, and I believe they said that the betrothal is rabbinical mandate, and that's why you can go back, because the rabbinic one isn't as strong as the biblical mandate?
Yes, that's a fine way of putting it. Exactly. That the biblical mandate is irreversible, of course, but the rabbinic engagement, although considered to be nearly as binding as the biblical marriage, meaning the intercourse, is not actually irreversible. You can undo the betrothal without as much change to your permanent status as the actual marriage does.
And so, Rabbi, does that mean that the prohibition of a betrothal person from eating teruma would be rabbinic as well, and the rabbis have as much power as they want to be lenient on something like that since it's rabbinic?
Well, it depends on what you mean by as much power as they want to be lenient.
Because it would be a stringency. So where the rabbis impose a stringency, they can also impose a leniency, right?
Yeah, not always. And I have to go back and look into the actual Midrash Halacha to see the precise reasoning used for this particular prohibition. But it's not always so easy as the rabbis giveth, the rabbis taketh, or the rabbis taketh, the rabbis giveth.
That was the common theme with the Eruv, right?
So with the Eruv, yes, that was a very clear. The entire topic was considered to be a rabbinic creation, whereas this is definitely a Torah issue. The rabbis are simply trying to find the appropriate borders for it.
Right.
All right. I think we've got time to get through 4. Yeah, no problem. Okay. A high priest, the Kohen Gadol. So you may remember from what we just said, as well as from other study, that a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a widow. And we're going to begin with that, and we're also going to go on with some other details. Please be patient as we go through this, because some issues may seem a little bit inappropriate, or a lot inappropriate, for the modern world. A high priest may not marry a widow, whether she is a widow from betrothal or a widow from marriage. So we just said that betrothal isn't quite actual marriage, in at least the sense of Truma. However, when it comes to the Kohen Gadol's super duper status, we are going to treat a widow from betrothal as being enough of a widowhood to not be married. Now, that would mean that even though she has not gone through with the marriage, she is now disqualified from marrying him. And he may not marry a grown woman. Now, this is the part that I'm sure a lot of people are going to be a little bit upset by. The term that is being discussed here is a technical term for a person that is more than 12 and a day. 12-year-old and 6 months and 1 day, and somebody that has produced 2 hairs, 2 signs of the development of puberty. So, is this saying that he has to marry a prepubescent girl? And the answer is, for the Kohen Gadol, yes, but that does not mean consummation. Very important why I wanted to say that very, very quickly to make sure it doesn't get lost as people were reacting to this. The rabbis considered it as a translation or as an interpretation of the Torah that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was severely limited in whom he could be married to. There were all sorts of problems with what the high priest was and who he was and everything else. But as we'll see, some political issues later on. And therefore, he had to marry a girl that was absolutely of perfect purity. And that's why they are choosing to marry him to a prepubescent. However, that does not mean that he would have acted to consummate the marriage, to have sex with her at that very young age. It would simply mean that now that she is married to him at that point, we do not need to worry about her status in deteriorating in any way until she is physically more appropriate for them to consummate their relationship. It's not exactly a favorite topic. It's not exactly an easy topic. They definitely had a different idea about the ages at which people could consent to these types of relationships. But it also isn't as absolutely terrible as it might seem from just the first reading. But it should make us a little uncomfortable, and it should make us very grateful that we now live at a time where decisions about getting married at this young are absolutely, completely unnecessary, and everybody should wait until they are of proper age, and then some, in my opinion. Okay, any questions on that before we move on to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon? All right, so Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon declare a grown woman is fit to marry a high priest, again, as long as she fits all the other criteria. And he may not marry a woman whose hymen was torn accidentally. This is called mukat eitz in the Hebrew terminology. It more literally translates to she was struck by wood, meaning that there was a physical accident, not intercourse, that caused her to lose the full intactness of the hymen. So she no longer has that physical symbol of her virginity. And for most people, and even for other Kohanim, this is not an issue. For the Kohen Gadol, this singular person, this was still a deal breaker in that case. If a priest betrothed a widow, and he was subsequently appointed to be high priest, he may marry her. So even though they were only betrothed while he was a regular priest, and thus he becomes high priest before they have finalized the marriage, the betrothal is considered enough that she can be carried over into his as his spouse and have the marriage be finalized, even though he's now become a high priest. Because she was permitted to him at the start of the betrothal, she is still permitted to him even after his promotion. Is that clear? All right, and now we're going to get an incident. And there was an incident of this case with Yoshua ben Gamla, who betrothed Marta bat Baitos, a widow, and the king subsequently appointed him to be high priest, and he nevertheless married her. So we actually have a case where this happened. Now, according to the commentary, she actually paid the priest to promote her betrothed husband because she wanted to be married to the Kohen Gadol. So this is one of the examples of, during the late Second Temple period, the corruption of the government at that period. Conversely, in the case of a widow waiting for her Yavam, who happened before a common priest, the priest was her Yavam, and he was subsequently appointed to be high priest. Even if he had already performed levirate betrothal with her, he may not marry her because she is a widow. So again, we have this this issue where her status as his wife truly does not become finalized until they have actually been together. Does that make sense? And yeah, go ahead.
What's the big difference between Me'amar and betrothal?
So Ma'amar is the levirate betrothal
Right.
that is done before the actual act of intercourse.
But why is it less strong than an actual betrothal?
Because an actual betrothal is the appointed way that the rabbis believed marriage should be started. However, with levirate marriage, it's clear from the Torah that the marriage only really takes place once there's intercourse. So the rabbis instituted the ma'amar, the rabbinic declaration of levirate betrothal, in order to normalize levirate marriage, but they can't override the fact that according to the Torah, it's not quite sufficient the same way it would be for just a regular marriage of regular people.
Right, but the betrothal process, the betrothal is stronger than the Me'amar when both of them are rabbinically done and neither of them are biblical commandments.
Right, but there's no biblical commandment prohibiting the status of a person changing when they are betrothed to in a regular situation. But there is a biblical barrier to treating it as being the same thing when it comes time for levirate, and a few of the other cases as we just saw, where there are certain special circumstances where the distinction between a levirate marriage and a regular marriage as handled by rabbinic enactment, that we need to make that distinction. We saw that sort of an example for the Truma case, where technically, yes, the rabbis are admitting that the betrothal was not quite sufficient and she's allowed to return to Truma. So when there is an overriding Torah rule, then the rabbis absolutely will acknowledge it. When there isn't, then they'll treat the betrothal as definitive.
Right, but here the distinction between betrothal and Me'amar, right?
Yes, exactly. And then finally, a high priest whose brother died without children performs chalitza, and he does not perform levirate marriage, as he may not marry a widow. So this is a fairly obvious deduction, but one that should be said anyway, just because it's finishing up the theme. If you are a Kohen Gadol, you can't marry a widow. And that includes the widow of a regular Kohen. And that means even if it's a levirate situation, you can't get married. But even though you can't marry her, there is enough of a levirate bond that chalitza is still required, that you still have to dissolve that levirate bond in order that she can be free and you are free of the obligation at the same time. So even though you're not allowed to finish it in terms of get married, you are allowed or required to dissolve it.
Sorry, Rabbi, one more thing. How come it doesn't require divorce? A get.
For whom?
For the high priest, because they are breaking the bond of Me'amar. Shouldn't that require a get?
Oh, you mean for the line before this one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's a widow, shouldn't he still have to divorce her after he becomes high priest?
No, but in the okay. So I need to make sure we're talking about the same cases. So we have sort of three cases that we just did. We have the last case, the high priest whose brother dies and he has a widow and there's a question of yibum. And in that case, he's not allowed to marry her. They have to do chalitza.
Right.
Then we had the case right before that where we had a person who was a regular Kohen. His brother, another Kohen, died. He has done the levirate betrothal with the widow, but before he can finish that, he's promoted.
Yes, that's the case. Yes.
Right. So in that case, we would go back. Yes, he would have to give her a get, and he would have to do a chalitza.
All right.
And then we had the third case, which was he was betrothed to her in a regular fashion and then got promoted. And in that case, he is allowed to still get married to her. Okay. And that will finish us off for tonight. A reminder, we have our Purim celebration starting tomorrow at 6 p.m. The community celebration is Friday morning at 7:45 p.m. Check the Ohev Shalom website for the live stream of that. And there is no Pathway to Judaism class tomorrow night because Purim. You should be tuning in and enjoying that celebration. Take care, everyone. Purim Sameach. Have a wonderful time. And I will see you for Mishnah next week.
All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.